Hey free-to-play gang, welcome back to another video. So today we're going to take a look at Cang, and I'm going to test him out a little bit, see how much damage he can do and what is probably like the better build for him. So right now I have him on, I think the Windwalker with Fiery, so he has, I think, okay stats. I feel like his stats are not bad. It might seem like he has rather low stats because his crit damage is really low, his defense is also quite low. But I tried to juggle a little bit of his speed, and that is the difficult part. So in order for him to have more speed, you have to lose out a little bit in like crit damage or defense percentage, something like that. So that's the reason why my stats kind of suck a little bit. And I apologize if this is not going to be a really good showcase of his DPS just because of like how bad his stats are. But I do feel like his stats are actually quite premium right now, I think. Anyway, let's take a look at his skills, followed by the rest of his kit. So, Word Launch attacks one enemy, scales according to his defense, and an 80% chance of inflicting disease for 2 turns. Now deals extra true damage, and the true damage is 5% of the non-boss enemy with the highest max HP, up to 100% of his own defense, and it doesn't work against bosses. So in my case, I have like, 3,400 defense, about 3,400, which means that my true damage portion is going to be about 3,400, as long as that is less than 5% of the enemy's max HP. If not, it is going to take 5% of the enemy's max HP as the upper limit, right? Now, skill number 2, we have Definitive Form. Attacks all enemies, it also scales according to his defense, with a 50% chance of inflicting stun for 1 turn on each of the enemy's hit. Now, if an enemy is not stunned by this effect, you then dispel 1 buff and has a 100% chance of inflicting AP minus 20%. Now, each speed grants extra damage, and the damage is actually 0.2% of his defense. So for me right now, I have like 200 plus speed, right? So with 200 plus speed, that means that my extra damage is about 40%, more than 40% of my defense. So my AoE attack is actually quite close to 100% defense scaling, which is not that good because my defense is also not super high, which means that my DPS is also not going to be super high. So that's the part where I feel like if you want to build him as a DPS and he does scale according to his speed, but yet at the same time that scaling is not a lot, I feel like this scaling is not as much as, like, let's say Gabrielle, for example, right? So if you compare her to Gabrielle, so let's take a look at Gabrielle's speed scaling, which is every single speed grants an extra 0.33% of attack, which is almost 50% more scaling than what Cang has, which is part of the reason why his damage output is not as strong as I would like. And then finally, we take a look at his third skill, Cosmos Writing selects one ally, which can also be himself, and triggers mirror effect, right? So it raises that ally's HP to the percentage of the non-boss enemy with the highest HP, and afterwards you also raise the AP of that same ally to the level of the non-boss enemy with the highest AP in their lineup. Then after this is done, you attack all enemies, and the damage is 50% of his defense, which scales according to the enemy's max HP up to 400%. I have no idea what this is, but we're going to test it out later on as well, but not for the first part of this showcase. Now obviously he's not an R2, because if he's an R2, his kit is going to look a little bit different, and I dare say that his R2 is very well needed as well. So he has flat HP, flat defense, 10% HP, 7 speed, and finally 20% defense. And as for his resonance, let's take a look at his resonance and why it's so useful for him, or rather why it's so important. So he starts off with final damage on his third skill, and second, R2, mirroring HP percentages change to swapping HP percentages. So yes, I've talked about this before, which means that right now, instead of just copying the enemy's max HP, you are now doing the swap like that, right? And at the same time, the same goes for the AP as well. R3 is just extra stats. R4 is when the target's defense is below his own, your damage increases by 15%, which is further pushing his theme being a defensive bruiser, but yet at the same time, I don't feel like his damage is like that good. And then finally Aura with extra stats, and Cosmos Writing with another morph. So right now, instead of just the target Esper, all your other allies will have their AP pushed up as well, as long as their AP is less than the enemy's AP with like the highest AP, yeah, something like that. So R2 is probably where he changes the most. So let's take a look at his damage output and why I say that his damage is like very mediocre, right? So just take note that the quality of my relics are probably not quite there. So I think maybe if you want to build him for DPS, you might not need to run him with speed. I feel like speed is kind of like a disadvantage because you give him a lot of speed, but his damage output is just like not good enough. So for example, let's use his second skill. 27,000 on 5 targets, which is just like, what? Why? Like, what's the point, right? And now we take a look at his third skill, which is you select an ally first before dealing the 50% defense damage that apparently scales up to enemy's max HP, whatever that means, right? So we're going to use it on ourselves. He does about 28,000 damage as well, which again is nothing because these Espers here, they have no defense whatsoever, they have very low stats, and yet our damage is like so bad, right? So that's the thing about like defensive based Espers. I've noticed that none of them deal a tremendous amount of damage, but let's figure out what his third skill actually does. And the way that I'm going to do it is, of course, in a content where I can scale the enemy's max HP, which is going to be APEP, right? So let's test him out in APEP, I think between APEP 5 and maybe APEP 16, and just to see what the difference is. Okay, so I have on myself not only a shield buff, but a defense buff as well, so my DPS should be as high as possible. So right now, my stats are a little bit lowered because I don't have full skill ups as compared to the VR Battlegrounds, right? So I'm gonna scale up to 340%, which I do not know what is being scaled. So this is like the top form of APEP with like the most amount of HP. So let's see how much damage we can do potentially to him. So we're gonna do it, I guess we can use it on the Esper with the lowest AP, so probably Abigail here. Just push her AP up, and we did 23,000. 23,000? What? Okay, so let's try this again. We're gonna buff ourselves with the defense buff again and push our AP. So let's see, right? This is APEP 5. So let's see how much damage my third skill can do. So previously I did 23,000, which supposedly scales off according to the enemy's max HP. So let's see this one more time, right? 340%. What are we talking about? So Abigail, you're gonna go up again. 36,000? I mean, okay, this APEP has like less defense, right? So that's probably why you are dealing more damage. But I'm just so confused. Like, then what's the point? I mean, like, what exactly are we scaling? Because this scaling seems like supposed to be a huge amount of something. I'm just not sure what this is, so I hope the developers can actually clarify what this is supposed to be. Maybe do a hotfix, just for us to understand what this is all about. So it's very confusing because we do not know whether if like the enemy's max HP is higher, therefore the damage is more, or if the enemy's max HP is lower, therefore the damage is more. Because in this aspect here, right, it does seem like we are dealing more damage, but then again, it's because APEP has definitely a lot less defense at APEP 5. So honestly, in my opinion, right, even if we were to, like, let's say increase our stats by a little bit more, like let's say we were to increase our defense by 1000, in total 30% more damage, right, like 30% on average, it's not even a lot, right? Even if we had godly relics, it's not going to push our offensive power to any great heights at all. So I feel like him as an offensive Esper is kind of weird, kind of bad, which probably means that I don't think he has a lot of purpose in terms of like generic content, because he doesn't even have like a huge purpose in APEP, in my opinion, right? Going on the offensive isn't even allowing him to deal like half the damage that Drew can do potentially, and he doesn't even have a defense break, so all he has is just like a disease tier. And I'm not saying that he's bad, okay? I'm not saying that he's bad. In fact, I do not even know where he's good at, and I feel like he potentially will shine somewhere, and he will shine very well, and that is probably going to be RTA when he's at R2, which is when he can start swapping HP, and probably works really well with like Espers like Renzi, works really well with Espers like Catherine, or maybe other Espers that lower their own HP. For example, Daniel, right, which is another Esper that I will showcase, or depending on where I upload this video, I probably already showcased Daniel. So in my mind, the way I see him to be properly built is probably, right, just probably, like, I don't know, man, even the Zeus set, I'm not even like fond of the Zeus set because he only hits like single hits, and he has AoEs, right, but he only hits single time, so I don't feel like the Zeus set actually matters. So maybe Ocean Waves so that he can toss his skills a little bit more often. I don't think that you really need him to be super fast because this is more like a retaliatory skill. It's not so much of like a turn 1 advantage skill. I don't know. I'm not too sure about it. You might effectively push your slow DPS up to the front at the start, which could work. But I think he's one of those Espers that I don't really know how to build because he don't have like a lot of debuffs on his kit. A lot of essential debuffs. So like disease, for example, who cares, right? And the stun and the AP reduction is not a very good proc rate. Like, okay, the AP reduction goes to 100%, but it's just like 20%. So it's really like, who cares? So I don't feel like he's an Esper that really needs accuracy as well. So then how exactly are people going to build him? So just a lot of speed, a lot of defense, but like for what reason, right? So it's probably going to be like a typical Fabrice build, for example. Just a lot of speed, a lot of defense, a lot of HP. Maybe that is kind of like the build that works the best for him. So I'm very, very confused. This is kind of like the first Esper that I've ever met that just got me so dumbfounded, and I have no idea what to do about him. And unfortunately, this is going to be the showcase for him for the time being until I find some use for him. So if you guys know where exactly or how exactly he's useful, be it in R0, R2, R6, whatever, let me know as well. I'm very curious to know how he works, but for the time being, I am just like completely gonna bench him. In terms of DPS, he offers next to nothing, and in terms of like support at R0 is probably like worth nothing as well. It's not something that I need. In fact, if you have like a healer, right, like just a straight up healer like Clara, like Hengria, whatever, I think they are a little bit more impactful than an R0 Changji. So with that said, hope you guys enjoyed today's content. I'm sorry it's a little bit disappointing, but I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless. If you did, don't forget to thumbs up, it really helps the channel, and subscribe for more Dislyte content. Now with that said, this has been Derry Free to Play, and as always, I will see you in the next video.